He drew his gun on me, a jogger in my own affluent neighborhood, believing I was out of place. What he didn't know was that he was about to meet his new deputy chief of police. The pre-dawn air was my sanctuary, cool, crisp, and tasting of jasmine from the manicured hedges lining the streets of this quiet, affluent suburb. The only sounds were my own steady breathing and the rhythmic crunch of my running shoes on the pavement. This was my ritual, my way of shaking off the ghosts of my job. An hour of peace before the world woke up and the chaos began again. I was on mile 4 of a 5-mile loop, my mind blissfully empty, my body feeling strong. That's when the headlights cut through the twilight behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. A car. So what? But it didn't pass. It slowed, crawling along the curb, its engine a low predator's growl that didn't belong in this serene morning. I glanced over my shoulder. A police cruiser. My heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm from the run, gave a nervous little stutter. I'm a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood. It doesn't matter that my house is bigger than most of the ones I'm running past. It doesn't matter that I pay more in taxes than some of these people make in a year. In the half-light of dawn, in my simple gray sweats and hoodie, I was just a shape out of place. I kept my pace steady, my eyes forward. Don't look. Don't give them a reason. But the car stayed on me, a heavy, silent judgment. Finally, a short, sharp chirp of the siren. I slowed to a stop, pulling out my earbuds and turning to face the vehicle, hands visible at my sides. My training kicked in immediately. Stay calm. Non-threatening posture. Let them lead. The officer who got out was exactly the type I expected. Thick-set, with a flushed face and a mustache that looked like it was trying to escape his upper lip. He swaggered toward me, one hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice even. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes raking over me from head to toe. It wasn't a professional assessment. It was a dismissal. Bit early for a stroll, isn't it? Especially around here. The "around here" hung in the air, thick and ugly. "Just getting my morning run in, officer," I replied. "Your run," he repeated, a smirk playing on his lips. "Right. See any open garages? Any cars with the windows down? People leave things out, you know. Tempting." I felt a slow burn start in my chest, but I kept my face a mask of neutral compliance. "No, sir. Just been focused on the pavement." "Sir," he scoffed. "Cute. Let me see some ID." This was the moment. The pivot point where these things either de-escalate or go sideways fast. "I don't carry my wallet when I run, officer. It's back at my house just a few blocks away. The big colonial with the blue door on Oak Street." I was trying to give him an out, a piece of information that would place me here as a resident, not a threat. He didn't care. His eyes narrowed. "No ID, running in the dark. In a neighborhood you clearly don't belong in. You see how this looks?" "I see how you're choosing to see it," I said, my voice dropping a fraction of a degree. It was a mistake, a flicker of challenge. I saw it register in his eyes. He puffed up his chest, his hand tightening on his weapon. "What was that?" he said, stepping closer. "You got a mouth on you, huh?" "I'm just trying to finish my run, officer," I said, raising my hand slightly in a gesture of peace. "We can walk to my house. I can show you my ID. We can forget this whole thing ever happened." "I don't think so," he snarled. "You're not going anywhere. You're going to put your hands on your head and get on your knees. Now." I stood my ground. "You have no reason to detain me." "I'm the only reason I need," he shouted, his face getting redder. "You fit the description." "What description?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Black man? Is that the description?" That was it. That was the spark that lit the fuse. His eyes went wild with fury. He saw me not as a person, but as a challenge to his authority. As he reached to grab my arm, I instinctively took a small step back. It was a tiny, reflexive movement, but to him it was defiance. In a flash, his hand dropped from my arm to his hip. The click of the holster unsnapping was deafening in the quiet morning. He drew his service pistol, the black metal a stark, terrifying void in the growing light. He raised it, his hands shaking slightly, and pointed it directly at the center of my chest. "I said, on your knees," he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. My world narrowed to the dark, circular opening at the end of that barrel. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every ounce of my training, every lesson in de-escalation, every instinct for survival screamed at me. But beneath the fear, a cold, hard anger began to solidify. This man, this glorified mall cop with a badge and a bias, was about to make the biggest mistake of his entire life. My posture changed. The quiet compliance vanished, replaced by an authority he couldn't possibly comprehend. I lowered my hands slowly, looked him dead in the eye, and let a calculated silence hang in the air for a full 3 seconds. Then I spoke, my voice devoid of any fear, carrying a new weight that made him flinch. "Officer Mark Miller, badge number 743, I said, my tone as flat and cold as a coroner's slab. "You have exactly 3 seconds to lower your weapon and call your direct supervisor to this location. Your career depends on it." The officer's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine confusion warring with his rage. How do you know my name?" he stammered, the barrel of his gun wavering for a fraction of a second. "Your name is on a nameplate, Officer Miller." "It's not a state secret," I replied, my voice dangerously even. "Your badge number, however, is something I made a point of memorizing the second you stepped out of your vehicle. The clock is ticking. You're now committing a felony by threatening a civilian with a deadly weapon without due cause. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence in this state. I suggest you lower your weapon before you add aggravated assault to the charge sheet." "Shut up," he yelled, trying to reclaim his crumbling authority. But the bluster was gone. His voice was thin, reedy. Sweat was beading on his forehead, catching the first real rays of morning sun. "I'm the one in charge here." "You were," I corrected him softly. "But you forfeited that privilege when you drew your weapon. This is your last chance, Miller. Make the call." His eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. The quiet suburban street was no longer his kingdom. It was a cage, and he was the one trapped inside. His hand trembled, and with a jerky, defeated motion, he lowered the pistol, though he didn't reholster it. He reached for the radio on his shoulder, his fingers fumbling with the button. "Dispatch," he said, his voice cracking. I need a supervisor at Oak and Elm." "What's the situation, 743? The dispatcher's tinny voice replied. Miller licked his lips. His eyes locked on mine. He couldn't say, "I just pulled my gun on a jogger who seems to know the law better than I do." Just send a supervisor," he croaked. "Is Sergeant Reynolds on shift this morning?" I asked, loud enough for the radio to pick it up. "Or did Lieutenant Davies pull the early duty?" Miller visibly flinched, snatching his hand away from the radio as if it had burned him. The dispatcher fell silent. I had just demonstrated a level of institutional knowledge that no random suspect should possess. The game had changed, and he knew it. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant hum of the city waking up. Miller looked sick. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life flash before his eyes, and realized it was about to end in a fiery wreck of his own making. The irony was crushing. For the past 2 years, I had been working on a new departmental training module. It was called DACT, De-Escalation and Community Trust. I wrote the section on implicit bias myself. I had personally lectured rooms full of officers, some young and eager, some old and cynical like Miller, about the dangers of exactly this kind of profiling. I had used charts and statistics and body cam footage to show them how a situation can spiral from a simple, baseless stop into a career-ending or life-ending incident in under 30 seconds. And now I was living my own training video. Finally, the wail of an approaching siren sliced through the morning calm. It grew closer, then stopped abruptly a block away. A second cruiser rolled up to the scene, its lights off. The door opened and a man with silver hair and a tired face got out. He wore the 3 stripes of a sergeant on his sleeve. His name tag read, Reynolds. He took in the scene with a quick, professional glance, his officer pale and shaking, holding a gun at his side, and me, a black man in a hoodie, standing perfectly calm and still. His eyes were sharp, experienced. He knew this was bad. "Miller, what in God's name is going on?" Reynolds demanded, his voice a low growl. "Holster your weapon. Now!" Miller obeyed instantly, his movements clumsy. He looked like a child who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Reynolds walked forward, positioning himself between us. He looked at me, his expression cautious. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Reynolds," he said. "Can you tell me what happened here?" I ignored his question. I looked at the man I had shared a coffee with just last week while we argued about budget allocations for new tactical vests. "Frank," I said, my voice cutting through the air, "it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Sergeant Frank Reynolds froze. His eyes narrowed, searching my face. I could see the gears turning in his head. The sweaty jogger in the gray hoodie. The voice. The unshakable calm. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes widening as the first spark of horrified recognition hit him. "Sir," he whispered, his professional demeanor evaporating. Is that you?" I gave him a grim, humorless smile. "Frank, tell your man here that he's on administrative leave, effective immediately. Then I want you to secure his firearm, his badge, and his vehicle keys. When you're done with that, call the chief. Wake him up if you have to. Tell him we have a Code 4 incident involving a member of his command staff." Sergeant Reynolds' jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen in the morning light. He stared at me, then shot a look of pure, unadulterated terror at Officer Miller. Miller, who was still trying to process my words, looked back and forth between us, his face a mask of bewildered panic. The term command staff had landed like a grenade, and he was starting to realize he was standing at ground zero. "Holy!" Reynolds breathed, finally snapping into motion. He turned on Miller with a fury I had only seen him direct at violent offenders. "You brainless idiot! Do you have any idea who this is?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Give me your weapon, your badge, now!" Miller, looking utterly broken, fumbled with his belt, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unclip his holster. He handed it over to Reynolds, followed by his badge, which he practically ripped from his uniform. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, the racist bravado replaced by the pathetic whimper of a man who knew he was completely and utterly ruined. "Sir, I didn't know," he stammered. "That's the entire point, Miller," I said, my voice like ice. "You're not supposed to need to know. Your conduct should be the same whether you're talking to a janitor or a judge. Or in this case," I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle, "your new deputy chief of police." The last word hung in the air, sucking all the remaining oxygen out of the street. Miller swayed on his feet as if he'd been physically struck. Deputy Chief of Police. It was a title I was supposed to be announcing at a press conference next Monday. I had just been appointed by the mayor 2 days ago after months of interviews and vetting, a transfer from the downtown metropolitan force brought in specifically to spearhead reform and community relations. My tenure hadn't even officially begun, and I'd already become a victim of the very sickness I was hired to cure. Reynolds, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on the planet, led Miller to the back of his own cruiser and put him inside, not bothering to lock the door. The man wasn't going anywhere. He then got on his radio, his voice hushed and urgent. I could hear snippets. "Yes, sir, it's him. I have the officer's weapon. Yes, I understand." When he was done, he approached me cautiously, like I was an unexploded bomb. "Chief, Deputy Chief Thompson, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say." "There's nothing for you to say, Frank. You didn't do this," I said, my body finally starting to feel the adrenaline crash. I felt a deep, profound exhaustion settle into my bones. "Just make sure the Internal Affairs Unit meets me at my office, and get this cruiser and this officer off my street. The neighbors are starting to wake up." As if on cue, a curtain twitched in the house across the way. A porch light flickered on down the block. My quiet sanctuary was now a crime scene, with me as the star witness. An hour later, I was sitting in my new, still unfamiliar office at headquarters, dressed in my own uniform. The gray sweats were bagged as evidence. Chief of Police Mike Sullivan, a man I was supposed to be working alongside for the next decade, sat opposite me, his face grim. Reynolds had given his statement. The body cam footage from Miller's vest had been reviewed. It was even worse than I remembered. It captured every sneer, every slur, every trembling, rage-filled second as he aimed his gun at my heart. "He's finished, Ben," Chief Sullivan said, his voice heavy. "I fired him an hour ago. For cause." His union rep walked out of the meeting. "There's no defending this. The DA is already talking about filing felony menacing charges." I nodded, staring out the window at the city I was now sworn to protect and serve. "What about his record, Mike?" Sullivan sighed, pushing a thick file across the desk. "It's what you'd expect. A dozen civilian complaints over 15 years, all of them for verbal discourtesy or improper procedure. All of them filed by minorities. None of them were ever sustained. He was a cancer we should have cut out years ago." "We're going to reopen every single one of those cases," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going to contact every person who ever filed a complaint against him and personally apologize on behalf of this department. And then we're going to use his body cam footage." Sullivan looked up, surprised. "For the criminal case?" "No," I said, turning to face him. "For training. It's going to be the new introduction to my D8T module. Every single recruit and every serving officer in this department is going to watch what Officer Miller did. They're going to see how quickly prejudice can escalate to a lethal threat. They're going to see his face when he realized his career was over. And then they're going to see my face. And they will learn that the person you're profiling on a dark street could be anyone. A doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or their own damn boss. The badge doesn't give you the right to be a bully. It gives you the responsibility not to be. That lesson starts today.